As the name of my channel implies, I'm a little bit of a fan of Ratchet & Clank. One of the PlayStation's longest-running active franchises, this series has had an immense influence on me over its 16-plus years in the spotlight. From the main series of games to the spin-offs of the spin-offs, all the way to the box office, I've experienced just about everything that Ratchet's had to offer. Everything, that is, except one game, a game that you can't even purchase anymore. That game is Ratchet & Clank Going Mobile, a 2D side-scrolling platformer released exclusively for Java-based cell phones in November 2005. On today's episode, it's time to change that, so join me as we look back at this oft-forgotten game in the Ratchet franchise. Now, even though I've put off playing it for so long, I've always been curious about this little game, but there's been very little info released about it over the years. Did Ratchet's original developers at Insomniac have a say in Going Mobile's development? How did development even work on this game? To find out, I reached out to one of the original team members that worked on Going Mobile, who's requested to remain anonymous. I'll be touching on some of the info that they've provided throughout the video, with much of this having never before been released based on my research. First and foremost, this game was made by the fittingly named studio Handheld Games, developer of a handful of different titles on the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS. These were almost exclusively licensed games based on Disney franchises, including The Cheetah Girls, That's So Raven, and Cory in the House, which, fun fact, is the highest rated DS game of all time, according to Metacritic user score at least. Take that, Chrono Trigger. In 2005, Handheld Games began contracting with Sony Pictures Digital for a couple phone games, the first being Spider-Man 2: The Hero Returns. Sadly, this game has been totally lost to time, so I couldn't capture any gameplay of it. That game's not available anywhere online, and the only footage of it across the web, at least as far as I can find, is a single YouTube video that I'll link in the description below. All I can really say is that this intro is fantastic. After Sony was satisfied with this first endeavor, they contracted Handheld for what would become Ratchet & Clank Going Mobile. According to the developer I spoke to, Sony and Insomniac had already storyboarded out a basic idea of what they wanted, and from there, Handheld added in its own feedback and ideas to the mix. While the game was initially planned to have a 4 to 6 month development cycle, Handheld went slightly longer than that in order to iron out some issues and get the game just right, with representatives from Sony and Insomniac checking in periodically to make sure Going Mobile was holding firm to the series' roots. Now, the real question here is, does it actually hold to those roots? I can't believe I'm saying this, but yeah, it absolutely does. Disclaimer, I'm no expert on Java phone games. I'll defer to my buddy Mini-Me on those any day of the week, but Going Mobile went well beyond my expectations. The game takes you through 18 levels of side-scrolling Ratchet gameplay, and while that gameplay is naturally basic, it's both fun enough by itself and incredibly faithful to the proper Ratchet franchise. You'll run, jump, use your swing shot, grind on rails, shoot enemies with your arsenal of 7 weapons, collect hidden titanium bolts, there's a challenge mode, hell, this game even has an arena with a dozen combat-focused challenges. Before we dive into all that, though, let's address the elephant in the room, the controls. As I said at the start of the video, Going Mobile was designed for Java-based cell phones, and for those of you that are too young to know what that means, imagine like an iPhone or a tablet, but much smaller, and there's no touchscreen on the front, and instead there are a bunch of buttons. I know it's a weird concept. This means that its controls are going to be mapped to a 12-button number pad, and that's about as inconvenient as it sounds. To the game's credit though, it may take some getting used to, but it's all very intuitive in how it's laid out. To move left or right, you'll press 4 or 6, and firing your weapons is dead center with the 5 button. Numbers 1 to 3 are conveniently mapped to be jumps, with 1 and 3 acting as a diagonal jump and 2 as your basic vertical jump. When in the air, you can also press jump again to use Clank's helipack, or you can press 8 to do Ratchet's hyperstrike. The star key is used for Ratchet's basic wrench attacks, and pound, or hashtag if you're too young to remember what a pound sign is, opens your weapon quick select. Now I said screw it to all that and just used my Xbox controller, and let me tell you, it felt like a Ratchet game, or at least what a 2D Ratchet game would feel like. Things as tiny as the wall jump feel ripped right out of the proper series, and while the swing shot and grind rails certainly, don't feel that smooth, it's about as faithful as you can expect from a game that couldn't be any larger than 1.5 megabytes in size. That tiny file size also led to probably my biggest complaint with the game, and we may as well get this one out of the way pretty early. Due to size and platform limitations, there's no music to be found in Going Mobile besides the title theme, and there are only a handful of sound effects. According to the developer I spoke with, having more than one sound simultaneously playing on these phones simply wasn't possible. You couldn't layer your audio into two separate tracks. That means that any music they would have put into the game would have been interrupted constantly by the sound of the weapon firing, which in a game based around weapons as much as Ratchet is, means that yeah, you may as well not even have the music to begin with. It's an understandable cutback, but that doesn't make it any less bland to hear the same exact weapon noise for all 7 weapons. Thankfully, those weapons bring us back to the positives, as the arsenal contains a good mix of classics and new weapons. Our returning weapons are the Lancer, Gravity Bomb, and Mini Rocket Tube from Going Commando, as well as the Rhino, which you'll unlock by collecting all 30 titanium bolts. The 3 newbies here are the Borzooka, which is this game's animal morph weapon, the Defragmenter, which is a shotgun, and in a game with a crunched vertical screen, a shotgun is incredibly useful, and the Circuit Jammer, which is just the worst weapon in possibly the entire series. It's got a really neat concept, firing homing shots that can only travel in straight circuit-like paths, but its only real use is as a gadget due to how slow those shots are. It's given to you for free at a certain point in the game because you need it to clear some circuit walls and progress, but by the time you get it, all of your other weapons will probably be at max level and do so much more damage. You heard me right there. I still can't believe I'm saying this, but yes, Going Mobile even has weapon levels. As you use each weapon to defeat enemies, those weapons will eventually level up to a maximum of level 3. As you'd expect from the series by this point, every new level will increase the weapon's max ammo count and damage output. Sadly, you can't see an experience bar for each weapon individually, but it doesn't take long at all to level these weapons up. If you rotate through your weapons whatsoever, you'll have everything at level 3 by the time you fight the boss. Really though, the only time that you'll notice the weapon leveling is when a gun's at level 1, because weapons like the Borzooka and the Circuit Jammer especially take forever to kill at first. With that said, as you'd probably expect from a Java phone game, the combat isn't nearly as engaging as in a 3D Ratchet title. You won't really have to flip around to bob and weave through enemy fire, you can just hold down the fire button and win most fights by attrition. In fact, if you don't count the final boss, Going Mobile only has 4 enemy types, and only 2 of them even fire shots at you. There are the chicken bots that return from Going Commando, as well as these little guys that explode when they're near you, fittingly named Explodos. And then there are some nondescript robots and turrets that'll shoot at you. The simple combat and lack of enemy variety mean that the arena probably shouldn't even exist in this game. Nobody would have batted an eye if it wasn't here. Yet again though, Handheld made sure to make everything as close to the source material as possible. In this case, the arena challenges are distinct and often reminiscent of the classic Ratchet challenges that we all know and love, including wrench-only or weapon-specific challenges, and even one where Ratchet's health is sapped over time by toxic gas. Of course, completing the arena missions isn't very hard, and it'll only take maybe 10 minutes. But doing so grants you more bolts than you'll possibly need to complete the game, and the arena is the only way that you can unlock the Borzooka. As you've probably noticed by now, there's kind of a theme here. This game is about as easy as it gets. If anything, the only challenge that you're getting here is getting into position to shoot some of the turrets, because they'll sometimes be tossed on the ceiling or on walls just out of Ratchet's reach. If I were playing this on a tiny phone, I could see it being a bit of a pain to jump and fire at the same time to take those down, so I guess the Circuit Jammer does have a use after all. Even in the off chance that you die, Going Mobile respawns you at the start of the very same room, maybe 10 seconds away from your sweet vengeance. And as you've seen by now if you've been watching the video, the level design is very blocky, very basic, and maybe a little bit repetitive, but then again this game lasts like 30 minutes tops if you skip the arena and the titanium bolt collecting. On the topic of those titanium bolts, they never really get past the same basic trope of, "Hey, this door's locked, you're not getting through. Don't look over at that switch like 5 feet away, it does nothing, I promise. No, you figured out that the switch actually opens this door and that I deceived you. How did you do that? No!" If you were looking for a challenge, I'm not sure why you're playing this game, really. As repetitive as the short levels may be, again, kudos to the game here because the locales are essentially cut down 2D versions of areas from the PS2 games, which is far more than anybody would have really expected. See, the game's story focuses on Ratchet and Clank getting shrunken down into the very phone that you're holding by a device called the Macrocorporeal Geofragmentation Ion Negotiator, or MacGuffin for short. More specifically, they're teleported into a Secret Agent Clank vidcomic, meaning that Going Mobile is a game within a game within a game. Areas from the PS2 games like the Mactar Casino are taken and adapted for the tiny screen, slot machines and all. And even the less directly inspired level backgrounds are pretty distinct from one another. Some level themes do repeat because the game does a little bit of backtracking throughout the story, but for a game that can last as long as a single PS2 Ratchet level, there's far more variety than you can ask for here. Anyway, back to the plot. Eventually, the duo is able to get in touch with Big Al, who helps them find the 6 pieces of the MacGuffin that are scattered across several different levels. Once they obtain all the pieces, they fight Maximilian, who you may remember as the villain character from the Secret Agent Clank Holovision series, and the duo prevents him from escaping the game and wreaking havoc in the real world. And that's it. With Maximilian defeated, the duo is teleported out of your phone to somewhere. They left that open to interpretation for the sequel, which we'll talk about in a bit. The tiny bit of text dialogue that the game has feels close enough to the characters, but that's not really saying a ton since there are only 3 major characters here. Outside of Ratchet, Clank, and Al, none of the major players show up, not even Quark. Well, technically Ace Hardlight is featured on some posters in certain levels too, but that's more of a tie-in to Deadlocked if anything. Actually, speaking of Deadlocked, let's talk about what might be Going Mobile's coolest feature. After beating the game, you can obtain 2 exclusive skins for Deadlocked's multiplayer, and even though Deadlock's servers are down both on PS2 and PS3, this still works even today. Going Mobile will ask you for your multiplayer profile name, and then give you a unique cheat code for that profile. The 2 skins are the Renegade skin, which is just an alternate design of Ratchet's base Dreadzone armor, and Eugene, one of the 3 kids that's sprinkled into some of Deadlock's cutscenes. I had no idea these even existed before playing the game, so this was an awesome surprise. Kudos to Insomniac and Handheld for sneaking in some cross-promotion here. All in all, despite its limitations, Going Mobile holds up remarkably well, and when it released it was heavily praised by critics. Well, the small handful of critics that played cell phone games back then. In 2005, it received the award for Best Action Game at the Mobile Entertainment Awards, and even now, it's considered one of the better Java phone games ever released. While I wasn't able to obtain any sales data for the game, it seems like Sony was clearly pretty pleased with it, since not long after Going Mobile's release, a sequel was announced by the name of Ratchet & Clank Clone Home. Scheduled to release in September 2006, this game would supposedly pick up right where Going Mobile left off, showing us where the duo ended up after the first game's ending. However, Clone Home was quickly and quietly cancelled because its plot allegedly interfered with the story of the coming PSP title, Ratchet & Clank Size Matters. What's perhaps most interesting about this is that while Handheld was assumed by everybody to be the developer of Clone Home, after all, why wouldn't they be? According to the former team member I spoke to, the proof of concept for the game was made by somebody else. Handheld had no involvement with it, and in fact, Going Mobile was the last Sony game that the team is documented to have worked on, leaving Clone Home's developer and fate
one of nature's mysteries.
If I had to make an educated guess, Clone Home might have been tossed to developer JavaGround, who started working on Sony Pictures games for Java phones only a year after Going Mobile released, and continued working with Sony until 2009. JavaGround also made Sony's other big J2ME game, God of War Betrayal, so it would make sense if they were the ones that got the nod for Clone Home. Either way, I would have loved to see how Clone Home played around with the formula, even if it would have most likely tread some similar ground. As it stands, Going Mobile is a neat little title. I don't think I can recommend it to most, of course, but to any of my fellow die-hard Ratchet fans out there that haven't tried it already, it's a good way to kill half an hour. It's better than the other Ratchet phone game, that's for sure, but I'll save that for another day. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay golden. This video was made possible in part thanks to the generous support of these Patreon backers. If you'd like to see your name on this list, you can do so by supporting the channel at patreon.com/thegoldenbolt. Thank you.